Doctor Doom. All will kneel before Doomsday. He's right behind me, isn't he?
Robert Downey Jr. has graduated from being the anchor to the largest film franchise in history to now being the anchor to the largest film franchise in history. At Comic-Con, it was just announced that the Marvel Cinematic Universe is putting all their chips in the basket of the one and only Doctor Doom, taking over for Thanos as the primary villain for the Marvel films, with none other than former leading Iron Man Robert Downey Jr. donning the iconic mask. And given Disney's track record when it comes to creating fan service and how they've handled the Star Wars franchise, this sounds about right. I'm approaching this as someone who's both a very casual fan of comic book stuff and superhero movies, but also as someone who's a fan of all kinds of film. Foreign, obscure, terrible, boring, it doesn't matter. I just love movies. I also approach this as someone concerned from a viewpoint of filmmaking and storytelling as an art form, and not so much as someone heavily concerned with the inner obnoxious drama of comic book Twitter. I don't care about debates on accuracy, faithfulness, whatever petty arguments that start when it comes to talking about giant tentpole franchises. Leave that shit in the dumpster where it belongs. While I do consider faithfulness important for adapting properties, it's just one of many factors to consider. Adapting anything warrants changes that will always upset someone, so any conversations on the topic are best approached with an open and toxic-free mind. At the end of the day, I just like good stories that are told well. I have two immediate first impressions regarding what Marvel is doing with their films. As a fan of all film, honestly, at this point, why not? Go nuts. Seriously. Throw every crazy idea you have at the wall and see what sticks. The idea of absolutely bonkers casting and character decisions sounds like it could at least be explosively entertaining. No need to keep dipping our toes into this little multiverse puddle with mild cameos and stories here and there, like bringing back characters that previous films had to put in all the hard work to make them memorable in the first place. F that. Go all the way at this point. If you're gonna try and one-up Avengers Endgame, then commit to that idea, or it'll fall short. Don't just have Robert Downey Jr. play Doctor Doom. Have him play multiversal variants of every character. Robert Downey Jr. playing Thanos, Galactus, Lex Luthor, Travis Bickle. Who gives a shit? If you're gonna get nuts,
come on, let's get nuts.
Robert Downey Jr. is a great actor. He's always had a knack for bringing charm and nuance to troubled, disturbed characters. I think it's the main reason why his introduction as Tony Stark is so damn fun. Watching him turn the table to play a super evil, all-powerful villainous mastermind, if it sucks, it'll be an entertaining disaster. And no matter what, with the brand recognition that Marvel has built themselves, it's unlikely that no matter how disastrous this turns out, it'll still end up making a boatload of money. Which is good. They'll need that to offset the cost of hiring RDJ, which is more than $80 million? Do you know how many movies you can make with $80 million? Here's a list of some of the most influential films ever made, and you could remake all of these films combined today for less than $80 million. And yes, I adjusted for inflation. On the subject of Robert Downey Jr. being cast as Doctor Doom, speaking as a very casual fan of comic book stuff, being a self-proclaimed pro gamer, I've dabbled in quite a few comic book video games, I've watched a healthy amount of animated series as a kid, and I've read some early Ditko, Kirby, Lee stuff, as well as some other random one-offs and graphic novels here and there. I've gotta say, yeah. Doctor Doom is arguably the most important villain in the entire Marvel universe. He's the king at the top of his Latverian castle. No other Marvel villain will ever truly be able to fully encapsulate the infamy of Doom. Even though Doctor Doom began as a Fantastic Four villain, he's graduated to being one of the greatest villains in comic book history. If there was one Marvel villain that could forever be cemented as the biggest bad of the whole universe, you'd be hard-pressed to find a greater threat than Doom. The multiverse basically makes it so that anything can be possible in the film franchise at this point, but at the same time, it can also undermine dramatic or emotional moments. Character deaths can potentially feel meaningless when you've established that there's an infinite number of possibilities. This is a very common thing for comic books. The multiverse is primarily used as a concept for reboots and establishing different interpretations of the same character. Regardless of all that, the MCU is only going to have one chance to adapt Doctor Doom. This won't be the only adaptation of Doctor Doom we see on the big screen in the future. Not by a long shot. We've gone through 3 different Spider-Men, soon to be 3 different adaptations of the Fantastic Four. Reboots and remakes of these characters are inevitable, and will continue on until the heat death of the universe. But this Regardless of timelines and multiverses and whatever, I think with a character as infamous and important to Marvel as Doom, I think it's safe to say that the first impression will be the most important one, and a redo or reboot after this is not going to work so easily. I can't think of a more important character for Marvel right now to introduce other than Doctor Doom. The X-Men and Fantastic Four are their next biggest heroes, and they've already outlined their plans for the future with them, but as far as villains go, Doom is number one. I've seen some internet theories floating about that RDJ's Doctor Doom will be a fake-out, in a style similar to Iron Man 3. He'll be a variant of Doctor Doom, a Tony Stark turned bad, leading to the introduction of the MCU's true Victor Von Doom to step in and make his claim to the universe. And while that sounds like a potentially clever way of introducing the greatest villain from Marvel, I highly doubt that'll be the direction that Marvel takes with it. And even if they did, I'm not sure how well a fake-out like that will land with fans of the MCU. If a fake-out is ever done, it's always important for the reveal to be more interesting than the build-up. I think that with a casting decision like Robert Downey Jr., it implies that no matter what, this Doctor Doom will have some connection to Tony Stark. It is possible that it's a situation where the same actor is hired to play a completely different character without ever addressing the similarity, but that won't happen. Casting the most famous actor and character from this cinematic universe is no mistake on Marvel's part. This Doom will have a very strong narrative and emotional connection to Tony Stark, meaning that when it comes to adaptations and faithfulness, this Doom will unfortunately not be the Doctor Doom that many fans are hoping for. Like I said before, I am a very casual comic book fan, too busy being a pro gamer. So I'm approaching this from a very casual, laid-back standpoint. But even I know that there are some aspects of Doom's character that I think will not be translated. Victor Von Doom is a very complicated, controlled, and powerful character. His popularity is succeeded only by his drive and power. Robert Downey Jr. is certainly capable of portraying these aspects of Doom, and from a pure acting standpoint, I think he could nail the role, but his casting highlights the elephant in the room. Marvel is desperate. A little bit. Marvel's obviously doing some last-minute pivoting and damage control. This movie had a completely different title, with a different primary villain behind it just a year ago. And honestly, with the movie set to release in just under 2 years, they should have already hit the ground running by now. And that's not even to mention that it feels like you can, and in Disney's case, probably should, have smaller-scale Avengers films to lead into Doomsday and Secret Wars. If Marvel had jumped the gun and skipped right into Infinity War and Endgame without the first two Avengers films, it could have been as disastrous as DC's attempt at jumpstarting their failed cinematic universe with Justice League. After the reset of Endgame, you need to build back up to your conclusion. You can't just skip the build-up and expect the payoff to work the exact same. Doctor Doom is an important character in the original Secret Wars storyline, so I imagine he would always make an appearance in some capacity for Avengers Secret Wars and the Kang Dynasty, but it's pretty obvious to say he was never meant to be the focus of Avengers 5, and I'd say it's unlikely that RDJ was always meant to be the first choice to play Doctor Doom, but that's speculation at this point. Even so, regardless of the casting, Doom is a very important character that I don't think a last-minute pivot will be sufficient enough for such a fan-favorite character, but it wouldn't be the first time for something like this. Spider-Man No Way Home had different ideas originally, with one of the first drafts featuring a more down-to-earth story with Kraven the Hunter as the antagonist, but the script was still being finalized less than 2 years to the film's release, and that was a huge hit. But the situation here is different. Infinity War began principal photography about 16 months before its release, so it's not like Disney is incapable of filming and completing a big-budget film in under 2 years. As of now, Disney has catching up to do if they hope to replicate the massive success of Infinity War and Endgame. While casting previous actors to reprise their roles can be compared to RDJ as Doom, there's a major difference. At the time, Marvel was still mostly at the top of their game. They were struggling with their films post-Endgame, but the state of the MCU and fan engagement was much more optimistic in late 2021 than where it is now, after failures like Ant-Man 3 and the Marvels, not including the hundreds of millions of dollars wasted on the mediocre MCU series on Disney+. Back then, the idea of multiversal crossovers still felt a little novel and exciting, but now, after seeing that idea milked dry by Hollywood and other forms of entertainment, reusing the biggest actor in this franchise after what seemed like a permanent retirement, how could it be seen as anything other than desperate? Marvel is correctly banking off of the goodwill from the Avengers films that was carefully earned over the course of 10 years. The Avengers films will always bring people to the theaters, but the thing is, most of the concerns I've brought up regarding possible fan disappointment to a faithful adaptation of Doom, or the seemingly rushed schedule for Doomsday and Secret Wars, these concerns don't matter to Marvel or Disney, because Marvel movies don't care about being movies anymore. This isn't some shocking revelation or news, and it's not an attack or criticism on Marvel's part. They're just doing what they think is best for making money and making fans happy. Think about it. When you go to watch these movies, you might as well premiere them at a stadium with the amount of clapping and cheering that's expected from the audience. That can be fun and memorable, especially when it feels organic and earned. I'll always remember the opening weekend for Infinity War and Endgame, especially the mic drop of Infinity War's ending. But as time goes on, I think Marvel and Disney and the talented filmmakers and crew working for them are forgetting the fact that they are first and foremost movies. A motion picture, a means to deliver a story that should theoretically have an engaging plot and interesting characters that are enjoyable or fascinating to watch. I am not a film expert, but I think those are the basic prerequisites for creating any film, any story that's worth creating to begin with.
And the task for all of us, including everybody in this room together, is for us to help create the greatest possible experience that we can all have together in a movie theater.
Look back at films like Avengers Infinity War, Endgame, or Spider-Man No Way Home. Whenever discussions are had about the films, it's usually regarding the memories or feelings that people had when watching them in a theater. Perhaps my internet algorithm has been ruined, but I don't typically see other elements discussed like characterization, writing, filmmaking. These aspects tend to go out the window when it comes to the biggest Marvel movies because they get overshadowed by those big wow moments. It's not like this is some unspoken rule. Marvel knows the reactions that these movies garner, and they even bake it into the filmmaking at this point. One thing you'll notice with the more recent bigger movies, and that was especially apparent in Spider-Man, is the awkward pacing and progression of certain scenes, because there are moments in the movie where everything pauses to give the audience time to clap and cheer so they don't miss anything important. I can't speak for others, but I can say for myself that once you notice these please clap moments,
Please clap.
then more of them start falling in place, and it just makes the movies feel less rewatchable because they feel less like movies. A movie always feels less like a movie when you can peel behind the curtain and tear away at that movie magic. If you've seen any of the biggest Star Wars projects handled by Disney, you'll find these applause-worthy moments sprinkled in them too. It's especially egregious for many of their Disney Plus series. Marvel movies are formulated to be seen in a theater, like any film should be, but they're uniquely structured in a way that I think ends up being detrimental to the filmmaking and artistry. Some of the films don't feel like they lend themselves well to repeat viewings in a more permanent format, like streaming or Blu-ray. I love Infinity War, and can always put it on and enjoy myself, but with Endgame and Spider-Man, I find that these two don't hold up nearly as well when rewatching them. There's a bloat that hampers them both. Funny enough, it kind of reminds me of the story regarding The Empty Man, a heavily experimental horror film that was one of the last films to be produced by 20th Century Fox before the corporation being purchased by Disney, because Disney collects properties and franchises like Thanos collecting Infinity Stones. The Empty Man had poor test screenings, was thrown into theaters with barely any fanfare, received poor critical and audience reviews, and was basically doomed to fail. After that, for a while, it was even uncertain that the movie would ever receive some kind of physical release, and I believe there was a bit of time before the movie even got released on streaming. Marvel movies are so preoccupied with being these unique theatrical, only in theater type experiences, and it's just funny to me that something like The Empty Man was arguably more of a unique experience given how unlikely you were to have actually been able to see it in a theater. Anyways, tangent aside, eventually it did get streaming releases, and I think it did release on home media too, and you should watch it. It's a very cool horror movie that is one of my favorite investigative thrillers in horror that I've seen in a long time. If I had somehow heard about it, I would have loved to have seen it in a theater. If you enjoyed Longlegs, for example, I think The Empty Man is very much worth your attention. I think Marvel's abandonment of more focused, isolated stories in pursuit of these limited, theatrical experiences lends them to losing sight of the true appeal of what comic book movies should do. They should tell grand tales of action and heroes and villains clashing, but they shouldn't ever get too bogged down in appeasing audiences with endless cameos, references, recasts of their favorite actors. That kind of short-sightedness led to something like The Rise of Skywalker, which was so preoccupied with trying to retcon previous films and vomit out fan service that it ends up being a disaster, albeit a very interesting and almost rewatchable disaster. You can have your silly fantasies and CGI explosions. As far as I know, that's basically the premise of the original run of Secret Wars. But Doctor Doom isn't remembered for his powers and abilities, or fun action moments, or the comic panels that are constantly shared on Twitter like God Emperor Doom ripping out Thanos' spine. Doom is most remembered for his character, his strive for power, his ego. The MCU has never been accurate to the source material, and even saying that out loud is silly. When these characters have had dozens of years of storylines, all handled by hundreds of different writers, what singular source material do you even adapt? The best approach, as has always been, is to take the spirit of the characters that is shared among all the source materials, or at least all the most popular ones, and try a new approach with it, while honoring the aspects that made the character interesting and popular to begin with. And to that extent, I think Marvel's been doing that pretty well. But their success wasn't built off of just honoring these characters, it was from making enjoyable blockbusters with likable characters you want to root for, like a well-made shonen anime. You've seen something like it before, probably many times. It's not particularly deep or thought-provoking in many cases, but it's entertaining and hits all the notes that it needs to for many people. When it comes to the source material, I say go nuts at this point. They've radically changed things in the past, but if the change results in an enjoyable end product, then at the end of the day, that's all that really matters. They've already completely changed Ultron and his backstory to create a connection with Tony Stark. But I say if they're going to rewrite Dr. Doom to create another connection with Tony Stark, go the full distance. Let Robert Downey Jr. go to work. Let him embody the evil and malice that Dr. Doom is, without relying on cheap fan service and cameos, and
Please clap.
make an interesting character, played by a talented actor, and everyone will remember that. They won't just experience these films, they'll continue to watch them and talk about them forever. But if all Marvel cares about is creating theater experiences by rehiring their most popular actors and not by writing engaging stories, then that will be just the first step in what I worry could be a terrible future for the film industry. At this point, Marvel and the talented filmmakers that have already done the hard work, the Avengers films are set up to do well no matter what. And once these future films are released, it'll create a shockwave across the world of big blockbuster cinema. We've already seen the echoes of this first wave with so many garbage, money-hungry legacy sequels like Halloween, Jurassic World, the newest Exorcist. Every now and then we'll have an amazing gem like Blade Runner 2049, but it'll take many more films like Ghostbusters Afterlife to get there. With Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars, Robert Downey Jr. being recast to play the lead villain sets a dangerous precedent for how films can be made in the future. What's the point of gambling on up-and-coming talent and new ideas when we can just safely rely on reusing the same actors over and over again? Hollywood is actively seeking shortcuts to make it easier to make films with horrible practices like shoehorning generative AI in their films so they can avoid paying artists what they're worth. Of course they will happily jump at the opportunity to rely on safety and star power over a chance at something new. Who cares about continuity when you can just create new characters and multiverses to have things work out for you? Why not? Whatever makes the most money or creates the most memorable experience. I don't care about a movie desperately trying to be an experience. I just want a good story. Films like Spider-Verse prove that the multiverse can be used as an effective tool for storytelling and not as a crutch for delivering cameos. The Beast by Bertrand Bonello was a memorable experience because of that film's shocking third act. The Green Knight by David Lowery was a memorable experience because of its absolutely perfect ending. Old Boy by Park Chan-wook was a memorable experience because, well, honestly, that entire movie is a fucking masterpiece and blows nearly every work of fiction out of the water. As a comic book fan and a movie fan, I just want a good story with good characters. It's been done before with Marvel. Their leading man got them off to that start with Iron Man, which tells a great story of a troubled man working towards a second chance at life after nearly losing the only thing he cared about, himself. When Marvel once cared about making stars, now they just want to reuse their biggest ones, or bring on whoever is on Disney payroll, or just hire the biggest actors on the planet, rather than taking a chance for something new and exciting. I sincerely hope that Marvel doesn't lose sight of the bigger picture, because the experience of watching an exciting movie at the theater is memorable, sure, but that's because of the reaction of the audience. It'll ring hollow if it's not backed by a great movie with a great story. At the end of the day, these are movies. These are stories, like any other story, that need to earn the audience's engagement and attention. If they don't, if they simply strive for clapping and cheering and writing whatever bullshit ex machina plot hole you need to justify keeping the same actor on payroll for the next 50 years, then that will ripple across all cinema, drowning in the sound that Marvel is so obsessed with hearing at their test screenings and opening weekends.
So this is how liberty dies. With thunderous applause.
This could lead to a future so devastating that the name Avengers Doomsday is actually quite fitting.